Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis, and once again, we're talking about three separate investigative areas, three tropical waves in the Atlantic as we inch closer and closer to the peak of that hurricane season, September 10th, September 11th. Things are getting much more active, but just to reiterate, there are no named systems currently in the Atlantic basin, just those three tropical waves, those three investigative areas. Now, the models are indicating 99L, the one in the Caribbean right now, could be troublesome as we get into the upcoming weekend. It is forecast to track into the Gulf of Mexico. Overall environmental conditions extremely conducive for that storm to grow rapidly. And I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about here in just a second. Now, as I mentioned, we are approaching the peak of the season. Conditions overall in the entire basin are ripe for seeds to be planted, tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa to develop and grow into formidable storms. This is typically when we see the majority of our hurricanes and major hurricanes develop, specifically out in the main development region of the Atlantic, where currently we do have one wave but has the lowest chances. That's wave Invest 98L. There's another wave here, 97L to the north, heading into the central portions of the North Atlantic. Not an issue for any land masses right now. And then 99L in the short term, 40% chances. Within 5 days, 80%. So it may be a little bit of a race between 97 and 99 to see which one gets Ida and which one gets the name Julian. And the name thereafter will be Kate. So this is the wave we're going to focus the majority of this video on, because modeling is just kind of going nuts with this developing into a formidable storm as we get into early next week. Let's revisit the 2021 names. We finished up with Henri. We had back-to-back hurricanes with Grace and Henri this past weekend. Next up, Ida, Julian, and Kate. That little asterisk there on Mindy, that's where we were at this same time last year in the historic 2020 season. Well, of course, we used up all the names, and we had to go over to the Greek alphabet for only the second time in history. Just to let you know, we're no longer using the Greek alphabet. We're going to use a alternate list of names, if in fact we do need that. Hopefully we don't need that this year. Here's a close-up look on infrared satellite imagery. Again, 40% within 2 days, 80% within 5. Overall, this looks pretty impressive for being just a tropical wave at the moment. As I switch things up and show you visible satellite, there is a very evident mid-level broad rotation showing up here. You can see the swirl taking place as it's building pretty quickly off to the west at 25 miles an hour. Now, right now, it's only got 30-mile-per-hour winds. There's no closed center of circulation. So that's why when you look at the models, you got to kind of take that with a grain of salt, because the models are pretty much playing a guessing game on where they think the center is and then initiating the models and going from there. Once we actually get a defined center, we can put that into the initialization of the models and have a little bit more of an accurate solution come out of those models. Here it is on water vapor imagery. This kind of gives you a sense of just how conducive the environment is, because we don't have a ton of dry air in the Caribbean basin, nor do we have much in the way of wind shear at the moment. And really on its forecast track into the Gulf, there isn't very much standing in its way aside from possible land interaction along the Yucatan Peninsula, which just dealt with Grace, obviously, and 3 separate major hurricane landfalls last year, so they don't need any more. Sea surface temperatures are ripe. They're in the mid-80s right now, and those temperatures are anomalously warm when you compare with the average. All the ocean cover here that's in yellow are sea surface temperatures that are above the average, sometimes 1 to 2 degrees above average. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot to you and I, 1 to 2 degrees, but every degree, or even every tenth of a degree warmer the ocean is, that is substantially more energy available for these storms to use to develop. Now, we've talked about ocean heat content before as well. We've got the skin of the ocean very warm. I just showed you sea surface temperatures. Ocean heat content is that warm water extending down to a depth. Right now, it's located in an area of pretty shallow ocean heat energy. It doesn't extend down to a depth, but going forward, as we saw with Grace, this part of the ocean, this part of the Caribbean, the highest ocean heat content in the entire Atlantic basin at the moment. So that warm water extends down to a depth. Why that's important is because when storms get going, they mix up the ocean. It's like a washing machine. It makes waves and it mixes up cooler waters from the depths. If we didn't have the ocean heat content extending down to a depth, what storms would do is they'd mix up cooler water from the depths, and it would be self-limiting. They would have much more energy to work with because the cooler waters would be below the 80-degree threshold. When you've got high ocean heat content, that's almost like a limitless amount of energy available for these storms to use. Something I also want to bring to your attention that's going to come up more and more as we get closer to when this enters the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to have an upper level high potentially, at least the models are indicating now, over the central parts of the Gulf of Mexico. And why that's important in the upper levels, if this is placed above this storm as it's rolling on through, this is going to help facilitate effective ventilation of the storm. When a storm moves on through, it's got inflow at the surface, outflow aloft. This placement over that storm would allow for the outflow to be much more effective. The storm would be breathing more efficiently, and this would help push along intensification potentially rapidly by this upcoming weekend. Conditions are just very, very favorable as we're getting closer to the peak of the season. So now let's get into the forecasting aspect of this, the prognosis as we go forward. We just diagnosed what's going on in the atmosphere currently. Let's look at what could potentially happen here as we go forward on into time into the weekend. So the models, we'll start with the GFS ensemble. Remember, this is the GFS run 30 different times, tweaking it. And if you look closely down here, you can see where it initializes. The models are playing that guessing game of where exactly that center is, and then from there, it puts a forecast out. There's not a ton of consensus. In fact, there's a lot of members that show this moving slowly and then into Nicaragua and Honduras. That's still a potential possibility. Otherwise, it's moving to the northwest, maybe making landfall in the Yucatan. If it stays north of there, it'll be much more situated to rapidly intensify with its overall structure still in relatively good shape. Land interaction would slow down that intensification process. And then all the other computer model spaghetti plots here, very similar. Some still go into Nicaragua and Honduras, some into the Yucatan, some steer clear of that and maybe even going over the far western portions of Cuba or maybe threading it in between the Yucatan and Cuba and heading into the Gulf of Mexico and developing, heading towards the Gulf Coast of the United States. Now let's do a comparison of the GFS and the European. The GFS is going to be the yellow lines, the yellow isobars, and then the red is going to be the European for comparison there. Not much going on in the short term here, so I'm going to fast forward it all the way to Friday evening. By that point, I think it's higher likelihood we at least have a tropical depression in the far western portions of the Caribbean. And then Friday night into Saturday, it progresses north of the Yucatan. At least the GFS and the European show minimal land interaction in that northernmost portion of the Yucatan Peninsula there. They both have it emerging into the Gulf of Mexico. GFS a little slower and stronger. European a little more broad, but still likely a named system by that point. We're going forward into Sunday afternoon. It's over the very warm waters. It potentially has that high ventilating it overhead in the upper levels. We've got low wind shear, a moist profile. Conditions are ripe for this to develop, potentially rapidly intensify. GFS certainly indicates that with a very strong storm. European getting on board as well. Notice that they're pretty good agreement of its track. GFS timing is a little bit lagged behind the European, but nonetheless, both take it into the same general area as it looks right now. This is different from yesterday because we had a sprawling landfall locations all up and down the southeast Texas coastline. Now they're more in line with what looks to be similar to where Laura made landfall last year. Not comparing this to Laura right now, but the potential's there for a similar track. And if the GFS and Euro are correct here with the intensification, it could be a pretty significant system at that point. Is this set in stone? Absolutely not. Again, we don't even have the center of circulation yet, so these models could be off. But overall, the trend has been turning that storm to the north earlier and pushing it a little bit farther to the east. So certainly New Orleans needs to watch this closely. Mobile, Houston, down to Corpus Christi, nothing is set in stone. This could certainly change. But there's how the GFS and Euro see things at the moment. So what should you do with this information? If you live anywhere from the Mexican coastline through Texas, Louisiana, over to Mississippi, and even Alabama, is watch it. Thankfully, we've got a good amount of time on our hands here. If what I just showed you was for a tomorrow landfall, we'd be very confident in the fact that that would be going into the same areas of Lake Charles, Port Arthur area in Louisiana. But it's not. We've got about 5 to 6 days of time to watch it as it develops in this area here. So watch it, review your hurricane plan if you live in this area, and just monitor the forecast closely because these models are run 4 times a day and they will change as the atmospheric conditions start to evolve. Overall, it looks like this system, of course, tropical systems are very moisture-ridden. And that's what exactly we're expecting here. A rather large system with a ton of tropical moisture getting thrown inland. So Anywhere that's east of the storm track, likely going to see a ton of rainfall and flash flooding potential. Also, the steering pattern I want to bring to your attention is different from where we were when we were talking about Grace. We had a large ridge of high pressure sitting over the Gulf Coast, which was great because it shielded the United States from Grace, but of course it forced it to the south and to the west and multiple landfalls in Mexico. It was a mountain of air. Now, Grace could not climb that mountain, so it stayed to the south. This time around, things are setting up differently. We do have some ridging in place at the moment, but that ridge, that mountain, is broken up into a peak here over North Houston, a peak over the Atlantic, and then a valley setting up in between, a weakness in that general overall ridge. Now, this system is going to exploit that weakness within these dual ridges, and it's going to make a little escape route to the north. Exactly where that weakness sets up, where that storm senses that weakness and starts to turn north is still variables that are in play and that will evolve as we go forward. But that's just to show you what the big setup is looking like right now. Elsewhere in the tropics, I told you we were going to focus mostly on 99L, and we did. But just to show you here as we wrap things up, 98L and 97L do look to develop, especially 98L. The models are showing this one possibly be strengthening into a named storm as well. They look to stay away from land right now. And once we do get a named storm, just to bring this to your attention here, kind of to put it on your calendar or set an alarm if you want to get the latest information. Once the Hurricane Center names a storm or maybe puts a PTC out or a tropical depression, they will issue advisories 8 times a day. Now, 4 of those updates will be full advisory updates, meaning we get an adjustment to the forecast cone. So at 5 a.m., 11 a.m., 5 p.m., and 11 p.m. Of course, an hour earlier, or hour later, hour earlier in Central Time, and then in between that you get the intermediate updates 3 hours in between. So we get 8 updates a day. All right, any questions on all this? I know we've got a lot to sift through. We're going to have a lot more to go through as we go through the upcoming weekend to see how things evolve here. But you can always find us on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. David's up next this evening. I hope you'll tune into then. And remember, if you like what you see here, hit that subscribe button so you're always updated with when we put out a new video. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.